Good afternoon and welcome to the Tuesday, August 2nd special meeting of the Walnut Creek City Council. The City Council is conducting this meeting from the City Council chamber, and staff are complying with the current regulations of the California Department of Public Health and Cal OSHA for safe indoor meetings. As a courtesy and technology permitting, members of the public may continue to provide live remote oral public comment via the city's Zoom video conferencing platform. However, the city cannot guarantee that public's access to teleconferencing technology will be uninterrupted, and technical difficulties may occur from time to time. Members of the public desiring to provide comments at the meeting are encouraged to attend the meeting in person. To provide a live remote public comment, join the Zoom video conference meeting. The meeting ID and password as shown on the screen are, ID is 854-2349-8490, and the passcode is 584735. When I open the public comment period, use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only, which will alert staff that you have a public comment you would like to provide. We ask that everyone who wishes to speak on an item, please use the raise hand feature to state your intent to speak when an item is called. If you're attending in person, please complete a yellow speaker identification card at the back of the room and line up at the lectern at the appropriate time. Given the COVID-19 pandemic and the increased number of speakers that have wanted to make comments on various issues during our meetings and consistent with city policies related to public comments, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make your remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. And the council also accepts oral comments. Written comments submitted and received up to 2 hours before the meeting have been posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record but will not be separately read in the record. Under California law, public comments at special meetings are limited to subjects on the agenda only. Public comments relating to the study session item, Sustainability Action Plan, will be taken during the City Council's consideration of the item. So moving right along, next on the agenda is the study session item entitled Sustainability Action Plan 2030, Phase 2 Report on Strategies for Achieving Greenhouse Gas Reductions and Improving Climate Resilience and Sustainability. At this time, I would invite staff to provide the presentation.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Dan Buckshire, City Manager. I'm going to kick things off this afternoon as we get going here for our study session related to our Sustainability Action Plan. As your council is aware, it's been some time since we've been to your council with a thorough update, and I can assure you today's update will be, if nothing else, will be thorough. Hence the reason for the study session. So I believe it's been about a year, almost year and a half, since we've provided a comprehensive update. There's been a tremendous amount of work that's been done since that time to gather input from the community, to analyze various options, to identify various options and targets, and analyze those options for how we may want to proceed as an organization and as a community with respect to updating our approach to climate management and the associated actions. The intent for today is truly a study session. We are not seeking any firm direction from your council. Obviously, we would welcome any input or feedback that you have or direction, but it is truly the intention today to provide an update and walk through the significant amount of data and information with your council and with the public, and to solicit any questions and feedback you may have. It is our intent, depending upon the outcome from today, to come back to your council in October with a more specific update in which we would be seeking some direction about which strategies to pursue or those which we may not want to pursue at that point in time. So with that said, I would like to introduce our team here that we have here today from the city. We have Carla Hansen from City Manager's Office and Emlyn Struthers from Public Works, who either, I don't recall at this point if they volunteered or were voluntold to help lead this project a while back, given some of the vacancies that we've had. And I do want to thank them for the tremendous amount of effort they've put forth to bring this to this point where we are today. We also have two folks from PlaceWorks, Eli Crispy and Tammy Seal, who will be here today to help us walk through the information. And we have Darren Neufeld with Harrison Associates as well, who's been instrumental in pulling this information together. So with that, I'd like to introduce Carla to take it from here.
Thank you, Dan. Can you all hear me? Good. Okay. It's on. Can you hear me? Yeah? All right. Good afternoon, Carla Hansen, Deputy City Manager, and I'm here to walk you through a little bit of our goals today. So we're about halfway through the sustainability plan development, and it's time to check in with council and the community on where we're at. So we're going to be sharing what we've done so far. So from phase one, how we set our vision for the plan, the community outreach we did, the technical studies that we've completed in phase one, and now that we're in the middle of phase two of this plan development, the proposed strategies that we have for your discussion and questions and public input. And what we're going to do today is really walk through our presentation, and it's going to be in 3 parts. So we're going to talk through the background of just how we got to this point. And then we're going to talk through a little bit of the new information that we have from the state and regional levels and how we put together these 22 strategies for your consideration. And then we're going to walk through each of the sectors of strategies. And I would recommend that because there is a lot of information in the agenda packet and at this study session, we're going to break it up when we get to the discussion of the strategies, breaking it up by sector and really pausing, taking questions on each sector and those strategies within that sector, and then moving on. So we have enough time for you all to get your questions in and the community to also provide input and then come back and have discussion with council at the end. So that's the kind of what's going to round out our 2 hours together today. I know we have a lot of information. As the city manager said, this is not the last discussion. We're not asking the council to make any decisions today. This is really an opportunity for us to dive into the information and understand it and hear your feedback and the community's feedback. So with that, we'll transition to a little bit of the overview of the plan. Sorry, you have thank you. So slide 3, Amy. So where we've been and where we're going. The city of Walnut Creek, next slide, please. So the city of Walnut Creek has been a leader in addressing climate change for some time. The council adopted a 2012 climate action plan, which outlined how we were going to approach mitigating climate change through a number of goals and strategies and actions to really achieve the city's greenhouse gas reduction goal of 15% below 2005 levels by 2020. Good news is we've reached that goal and we've actually exceeded it by about 10%, which is we can pat ourselves on the back. We didn't get to do that because 2020 brought us other challenges. But we did exceed those goals, and we continue to implement the 2012 Climate Action Plan as we are building this new Sustainability Action Plan. Next slide, please. So the Sustainability Action Plan continues the 2012 Climate Action Plan, but really strengthens the city's efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the short term. So looking ahead to 2030 and how do we achieve the state's goals for emissions in 2030, and then looks out to 2050 as well to address the goals that we need to meet there as well. And the addition to this Sustainability Action Plan is that it really does focus on resiliency and adaptation as climate change is now becoming a day-to-day part of our life. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emlyn Struthers. To talk through how we got to this point.
Excellent. Thank you, Carla, for teeing things up for me. We have approached this project development in 3 phases, as Carla briefly mentioned. So we are smack dab in the middle of things, developing our strategies. And we are trying to address not only greenhouse gas emissions this time around, but we are also looking at climate resilience and sustainability for 2030 and into the future. So I'll be taking a look at how we develop these strategies and considerations that have shaped the proposed strategies that we'll be looking at today. When we think about strategies we can implement with our next sustainability action plan, we need to first take a look at what actions we're doing already. When we continue to implement the CAP, we are able to take credit for those greenhouse gas emissions reductions and continue to reap benefits from those over time. So these actions are incorporated into the proposed 2030 Sustainability Action Plan. In addition, we are looking at changes that have happened since 2012 at the state level. So we are seeing the development of new clean car standards, as well as improvements to our building code in Title 24 that continue to make existing and new construction more energy efficient. In addition to what's happening at the state level, we're seeing other improvements happening at the regional and local level. We've seen increased electric vehicle adoption throughout the state and in our community. We've been able to source energy through cleaner sources, such as Marin Clean Energy. So our MCE participation is helping bend that curve of our greenhouse gas emissions here in Walnut Creek. And we're able to incorporate that into our sustainability action plan. In addition, we've seen lots of investments in active transportation infrastructure for bicycles and pedestrians and other means of getting around, and we're able to reap the benefits of that as well. In creating this new plan, where do we need to be headed and where should we be looking? What are those targets? So if we start with the very top line, in our baseline emissions are set in 2005 because that was the best year of available data that the state had. And that is where we started out, around 610,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. We then needed to achieve what is considered a 1990 level of emissions, or 15% below that initial 2005 baseline. So 518,000 is where we needed to be. As Carla mentioned, we actually achieved a 25% reduction, and we're able to get down to about 458,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions. The next goal that we're looking at is set in statute, and it's in 2030. We need to attain emissions of 40% below our 1990 levels. So there's still a bit of a shortfall there, and that's where these proposed strategies will come in and help us achieve those goals. In the longer term, there's 2 executive orders that we need to make progress towards as a city and community. In 2045, we are looking at an executive order that aims for net carbon neutrality. There's a current draft CARB scoping plan that sets forth a plan for cities to do their fair share to achieve this goal. I also want to note that net carbon neutrality is not possible with carbon sequestration and offsets. So right now, local governments like the city of Walnut Creek are not able to quantify those reductions. They can be quantified at the state level, but not quite yet for us. So the quantifiable goal that we need to look at as a city is 2050, also set in executive order, achieving reductions of 80% below 1990 levels. So that explains at a high level the greenhouse gas emission goals that we're trying to meet in 2030 and looking towards in the longer term. But that's not the entire context of what's going on. In addition to those policy changes that have already been implemented and we're integrating, there are some new things on the horizon. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District, or BACMed, recently adopted new CEQA thresholds for new development. And this dictates that all new development must be electric. However, they also say that cities can choose to develop their own qualified action plans to set their own specific local requirements. Next, the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, is in the process of creating this 2022 scoping plan. The draft plan is in review, but it's pushing towards regulations with a statewide goal of being net carbon neutral in 2045. There's more pending policy changes that impact our operations and goals here in Walnut Creek. So Executive Order N7920 dictates that all new vehicles sold in California will be zero-emission vehicles by 2035. And now CARB is in the process of rulemaking to make this vision a reality. On the home front, BACMed is in the process of rulemaking that mandates when home heaters and water heaters are replaced, the replacement appliances will be all electric. With so many factors, how do we weigh in and balance these different criteria? Well, last year, Council considered and adopted criteria to evaluate these strategies. Among these considerations are the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the estimated costs and financial savings based on the best available cost information, and to whom these costs or savings will apply, whether it's the city or a private entity. The cost and estimated greenhouse gas emissions reduction information is included in attachment 1 to the staff report, and it is listed out on what is called the quantitative matrix. Other factors considered included ease of implementation, co-benefits like equity, community resilience, or increasing jobs, applicability, meaning who and what are impacted. For example, one strategy may apply only to city facilities, whereas another strategy may apply to existing homes and impact those homeowners or renters. Very importantly is also the level of implementation. Is a strategy voluntary or mandatory? As a mandatory strategy would require, for example, a city fleet to electrify. There's also a mix of voluntary strategies, such as those that may support partnerships for water reuse or promote sustainable development. Those qualitative factors are outlined in attachment 1 in the qualitative matrix. In order to consider these criteria fully, including feasibility, partnerships, and other feedback, stakeholders have been engaged for their input on these draft strategies throughout the process. You'll see a very lengthy stakeholder outreach summary included as attachment 2 in the report materials. So stakeholders and the community were engaged through a number of different means. There were workshops, events, online surveys, and other meetings. The picture on the screen here shows a header for a survey that was conducted and posted on the city's homepage. All of this feedback has directly informed and shaped the proposed strategies that we'll be talking about today. So what we've found almost universally is there's broad support for the city to lead on climate action and sustainability. We've also found in speaking with our stakeholders, including the business community, homeowners, and others, that many community members are already integrating sustainability into their business operations or their own homes. The bulk of community feedback that we received pertain to 2 main buckets of strategies, and those are related to electric vehicles and the transition towards building electrification. We also saw across all of the different strategies that we discussed, there was a request to keep our specific jurisdictions' requirements consistent with those of surrounding communities to avoid confusion or other complications. So now, to discuss these strategies, I will turn it over to Eli Crispy with PlaceWorks.
Thank you, Emmeline. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eli Crispy with PlaceWorks. I'll be going through some of the more technical details associated with the Sustainability Action Plan strategies. So the strategies in the Sustainability Action Plan are divided into these 5 categories seen here. Off-road equipment, the strategies that relate to that, is included as part of that 5th category of community health and resilience. Emmeline mentioned the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals of reducing emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. Without the strategies in the Sustainability Action Plan, so if the city continued on the path that it's currently on with the adopted Climate Action Plan and with applicable state and regional reductions, you would see that the city makes some progress towards those state goals, but doesn't fully achieve them. Emissions would be reduced to about 24% below 1990 levels by 2030 and to about 29% below 1990 levels by 2050. With the Sustainability Action Plan in place, emissions are reduced to about 42% below 1990 levels by 2030 and to over 81% below 1990 levels by 2050. So the city would meet and would exceed the state's greenhouse gas reduction targets. And here you just see that information graphically. The blue line with the triangle indicators is the state or the city's greenhouse gas reduction trend without the Sustainability Action Plan. The yellow line with the circles is the state or the city's greenhouse gas reduction trajectory with the Sustainability Action Plan. The gap between them is the amount of emissions that is reduced by the strategies in the Sustainability Action Plan. You can see that that wedge is made up largely of two sections. The green wedge, which represents emissions reduced through retrofits to Walnut Creek's existing buildings, and that blue wedge, which represents emissions reduced through electrification of vehicles, both public and private. The other strategies in the Sustainability Action Plan are certainly important and certainly play their part, but it's those two strategies of retrofits and electrification that make up most of the reductions. So I'll now go through some of those strategies and some of the details associated with them, beginning with the strategies in the buildings and energy supply category, which is what you see here. These four strategies collectively are responsible for about 25% of the reductions in the plan by 2030, growing to about 43% of reductions by 2050. And by far the largest section of reductions here is that third bullet point about facilitating energy efficiency and electrification for existing buildings and infrastructure. This is talking about retrofits to existing private buildings, homes and businesses. That is a very broad category. It includes everything from an individual replacing their home water heater up to replacement of all appliances, and even broader replacement of doors and windows, new insulation, new ductwork. It could really be the works in many cases. Overall, we are assuming that by 2030, there are about 16,000 homes in Walnut Creek that would achieve some level of retrofit. Again, anywhere from an individual water heater all the way up to redoing their entire house. And that would also include about 1,200 non-residential spaces. The costs for retrofit activities do vary quite widely as well. They can be as low as a few $1,000s for a new water heater or a new space heater. For a home, they can be upwards of $20,000 for whole home retrofits, not including cosmetic changes such as new cabinets, new flooring, paint, and so on. For a full office building, that can be even higher, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases. But what is worth remembering is that they are cost effective. These retrofits do pay for themselves, in some cases as little as in 7 to 8 years. The money saved from the retrofits, from the energy saved from the retrofits, will equal and then exceed the initial cost to carry them out. The second largest strategy here is that fourth bullet, the electrification and low carbon materials for new buildings. What this means is that new homes and many new commercial buildings built in Walnut Creek, including offices and retail space, would be built to be all electric. They would not be built with natural gas infrastructure. And this would likely be done through what is called a REACH code, which is an amendment to Walnut Creek's building code, although there are other mechanisms of carrying this out. There are over 60 communities in California that currently have some kind of REACH code, so it has been shown to be effective and implementable several other places in the state. We would assume under the Sustainability Action Plan as currently drafted, that a REACH code would begin applying to new residential buildings in 2026 and to select non-residential buildings in 2029. REACH codes or other electrification efforts for new buildings typically have negative costs. They are cheaper. It is cheaper to build an all-electric building than it is to build one with both electricity and natural gas. So in effect, they begin paying for themselves immediately. And I should also add that there are a number of state and regional efforts to also look at incentivizing or mandating new all-electric buildings. I know that is a lot. I am happy to pause here for any questions on the building and energy supply strategies.
Thank you, Eli. Any questions of Eli? Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
I just want to confirm some of the numbers because you were speaking quickly. So this category, when I look at the page in the staff report, really represents about 23% of the total savings we would get for 2030.
That's correct.
But that is only strategy 3, not the REACH code. The REACH code is not included in the numbers that are in the table.
The number of 25% by 2030, that is all 4 of these strategies.
Then why does it only say strategy 3 in the table?
I believe the table itself, yes, that is just, excuse me, that is only the retrofits.
Okay, which
to
is
existing.
facilitated, not mandated.
Correct, with the exception of what might be covered through BACMed regulations that are pending, as Emmeline mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Darling.
Thank you, and thank you for diving into all the numbers on this. I noticed in the big sheet where you're talking about opting into MCE Deep Green, you didn't give us a number of how many people have opted in. You have just the number that have opted out completely out of MCE. Do we know what percentage of residential addresses have opted into Deep Green?
It is approximately 2 to 3% of homes and businesses in the city that have done that.
And presumably, if you were to increase that, that would decrease the amount of greenhouse gases in the analysis.
Exactly, yes. And we are projecting some increase in Deep Green as a part of the Sustainability Action Plan.
Okay, and then on the retrofits of the existing buildings, earlier today we were doing the housing committee and we were looking at, they have in the housing element the percentage of buildings built in different times. I'm presuming that the buildings that are built in the 50s and 60s before the original oil embargo are the least efficient. Is there any idea of targeting some of the retrofit, or is it just still being looked at as a very general retrofit when people are ready to come in?
I mean, any retrofit to a building will improve its performance. In general, you get the most bang for your buck for buildings that were built prior to the modern energy code, which came in around 1978. So those buildings, 50s, 60s, and 70s, those are where it makes the most sense to target. But there are still cost savings and certainly greenhouse gas savings from buildings constructed in the 80s and 90s as well.
Okay, so there is enough differential there if somebody comes in. Is it, you're saying it's net positive? Is that if their heater is ready to be retired and they buy a new one, they will make enough in the savings?
Yes, well, even if the heater wasn't ready to be retired, there is still, eventually there comes a point where the cost savings from going all electric will override the cost of buying the heater. But it's certainly more cost effective to do it when you need to replace the heater anyway.
Okay. I was having, and we'll get to this when we discuss the table, I was a little lost in the table on some of these things. So those are my questions for this part. Thanks.
Councilmember Haskew.
Hi. So you're talking about energy being, I'm hearing, at a fairly predictable level cost as we need more energy to supply the energy demands that are going up. How do you compensate or consider whether they're going to, are you saying, tell me how you figured out what the cost is going to be?
When we are looking at the cost savings from these types of activities, we are looking at a cost of energy over time, and that's based on state forecasts of how they anticipate the cost of electricity and the cost of natural gas to evolve. So we are factoring in, we're not assuming that the cost of a kilowatt hour or a piece of natural gas will stay constant.
Okay. My second question is for those of us that have been little by little improving our own personal property, putting in new windows, putting in reinforcing our insulation, doing everything we can to along the way do that. How is that measured, and how, I mean, did we do it out of the kindness of our heart, and that's how we got to more than our original component? Because everybody I know are trying to do the right thing all along. How do we measure that, and how do we include that in the calculation?
Well, it is included. I mean, certainly the kindness of your heart helps, but we know that many people also do it because it is shown to be cost effective, and it improves the air quality in an individual home. So any retrofit that has occurred by 2017 or prior is already factored into all these numbers. Anything that would occur post 2017 is treated as part of these strategies. So they contribute to that cumulative total of 16,000 homes by 2030 that I mentioned.
Okay. I think that's it.
Councilmember Wilk? I just wanted to confirm some of the numbers that you were citing. In terms of the retrofits, was it 16,000 for residential that you estimated would, seemed high?
They do vary pretty widely. If you're replacing individual appliances, that's usually a few thousand, 2, 3, 4,000, depending on the appliance. If you're adding...
I'm sorry, I meant the total number of homes
Oh.
that you expected to be retrofitted.
Yes,
Yeah.
16,000 by 2030 at any level along that process.
Which could range from changing your water heater to an appliance to a furnace to doing a fuller remodel.
Correct, but that would not include anyone purely doing cosmetic retrofits or adding an extension to their home.
And then 1,200 for non-residential, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And how many other agencies throughout the state had adopted REACH codes?
There are a little over 60 communities that currently have one in place.
Okay. Yeah, and then so my understanding is in the BACMID CEQA threshold would be that you have, that existing buildings, if you're replacing a water heater or furnace, have to go electric. You can't use gas.
Correct. The pending BACMID regulation would require that beginning in either 2026 or 2029.
Okay. And then what's the rule that they're proposing?
It's a rule that is based on reducing air pollution. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it's pending before the BACMED board would go forward by the end of this year.
Okay. And then, sorry to get too into the weeds here. I'm just trying to mesh this together with kind of what the state's already doing. I think you provided a good understanding that essentially to meet these reduction targets, we would have to have a REACH code in effect by 2026 for residential and 2029 for non-residential. We're calling it a REACH code. Are we not expecting that the state Title 24 will have gotten to that level, that would be a mandatory requirement?
The state has indicated they want to move in that direction, but at the moment there aren't firm indications of exactly what that might look like, what specific standards might be necessary, who would be included or who would not be included. So what we're proposing in the Sustainability Action Plan would very likely align with where the state would like to go, but in the absence of that certainty from the state level, we're trying to give the city some local certainty and some local authority.
Okay. And the triggers for the retrofits would be something that we would decide at a local level if we factor that into this plan, is that right?
Yes, usually for appliances is when you need to get a plumbing or electrical permit to replace the appliance. Many other retrofits would be triggered by the building permit.
I guess, and just one last one, is it going the direction that, like with light bulbs, you can't buy the old light bulbs anymore. You can only buy the new LED ones. Is that essentially kind of you'll go to the marketplace to buy a new stove and it'll only be electric? You won't have the option to buy gas? Is that essentially what we're envisioning?
Long term, that's probably where things are headed, but we haven't seen specific rulemaking on that says there's no
Okay.
gas appliances.
Mayor Pro Tem, you had a question.
So, and thank you, Mayor, for saying 16,000, because that was one of the numbers I didn't quite catch what you were referring to. Are you saying that the estimates, the assumption in our estimates is that 16,000 of our housing units will have some level of retrofit in the next 8 years?
Yes.
How many housing units do you think we have?
I
Because
have-
that's just under half. So that's a pretty aggressive estimate, is it not?
It is an aggressive estimate, but not one that we feel is unrealistic, given the BACMed regulations that are pending to cover the new water heaters and space heaters, which are included in that 16,000. We also know that there's a lot more, there's expected to be a lot more support for incentives and greater push for retrofits coming from the state as part of their recent attempts to achieve the 2030 greenhouse gas reduction target at the statewide level.
All right, so this is in the table in the staff report. That's the underlying assumption really on generating this level of reduction.
That is a major factor of it, but we certainly expect that there would be some local effort to encourage and incentivize retrofits in partnership with PG&E and MCE and with others in the area.
And then I think I've heard something different than the mayor heard. I heard you say that this level of reduction for 2030 did not assume a REACH code in place. And now you're saying it does assume that we adopt a REACH code that mandates these changes.
I'm sorry, are you talking about a REACH code for retrofits to existing buildings or one that would apply to new development?
I'm looking at the words facilitate versus require.
So what we are proposing in the Sustainability Action Plan would be to encourage and incentivize
Which is
retrofits.
facilitate, so that's item 3.
Correct. That applies to existing buildings.
Right.
The only thing there that would be required would be the pending BACMed regulation.
So you're not, and so the numbers that are in the table that get us to where we need to go do not assume that we have to locally adopt REACH codes beyond BACMed's requirements.
Not for existing buildings.
Okay, I think we're getting conflicting information, so.
Let me try one thing to clarify this. So what we're saying is we're going to have a voluntary program on retrofits, but we are going to adopt a REACH code that requires electrification on new construction.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're set on buildings and energy supply.
All right. Well, with that, I can move to the next category, which is transportation and land use. The strategies in here would cover about 68% of the reductions by 2030 and 51% of the reductions by 2050. And the vast majority of those reductions come from the first 3 strategies here, which relate to electrification of vehicles, EVs. Right now, about 5% of the vehicles on the road in Walnut Creek are electric. That includes plug-in hybrids. We have seen that number increase dramatically over recent years. In Contra Costa County, you have the 6th highest rate of new electric vehicles of any county in the state. And we know that this is one that the state is pushing very, very aggressively in the face of pending executive orders and regulations that Emmeline mentioned. So because of that rapidly evolving market, because of the state push, we are projecting in the Sustainability Action Plan 35% of vehicles to be electric by 2030. And that is prior to last week's announcement at the federal level that there might be more funding available for EVs. That comes prior to new state policies that are still being worked out. So again, we think this is something that is certainly an aggressive, progressive approach, but it is within the realm of feasibility. We are assuming growth here of both private EVs and EVs owned by the city as part of the city fleet, and that this would include a lot of creation of new publicly accessible EV charging stations, in addition to people installing EV charging stations at private homes and businesses. This set of strategies also includes language that relates to expanding active transportation, supports increased transit service, and concentrates new development in centralized, easily accessible locations. And the strategies here are broadly consistent with the approach that the city has already adopted in the Rethinking Mobility strategy from a couple of years ago. So I can pause here for any questions on transportation and land use.
Any questions on transportation? Not seeing any burning questions on that topic.
Well, I will move on to the next category, which is water.
Oh,
Nip,
yep,
nip.
you've got one.
And I'm sorry I didn't turn off my microphone. So there are a lot of people who collect old cars.
Yes.
Where do they fit in all of these things? Because they probably cannot be reconstructed as electric vehicles. Where do they get gas?
Well, at no point in here are we proposing to ban gas vehicles or anything like that. The state has said that they want no new vehicles that use gas or diesel to be sold beginning in 2035. As far as we could tell, there would still be gas available, and there would still be used gas vehicles available for purchase if that's something people wanted. So new vehicles are shifting towards EVs. We expect used vehicles to also move in that direction. But at no point, either here or at the state level, is there talk about banning any gas-powered vehicle from the road.
Yes.
As you did in the previous section, I think it will be helpful to understand for each of these three what the underlying assumption in terms of take-up, percentage change, whatever you want to call it, is necessary to achieve the numbers in the table in terms of the reduction. So you said for number 5, it's an assumption that there will be 35% of the vehicles in Walnut Creek by 2030 will be all electric, not hybrid.
All electric or otherwise zero emissions, so hydrogen potentially, if that was an option.
All right. And what is the current level?
Currently, or as of last year, it was 5%.
Okay. And what is the assumption on the availability of electric vehicle charging ports, stations? How many do we have currently? And what would we need to get to in order to get to the numbers that are in the table?
Currently, I would have to bring that number up. You have between, I think it's around 80 to 120 that are publicly accessible.
Okay.
But that does not include privately accessible EV charging stations in a private home or business's garage or carport. So that number is likely quite a bit higher.
That's the current. What do we have to get to achieve the goal?
Depending on the individual's preferences, you could install a charger at every single one of those homes that has an EV, but they can also choose to charge up purely at existing EV charging stations. There's not a specific number of EV charging stations the city would have to install that would directly translate to 35% EV adoption.
So strategy number 6 is designed to drive convenience.
Yes.
The term drive is used intentionally. Drive convenience in terms of being able to make it easy for people to want to buy an electric vehicle and not have to go through the cost of installing or maybe even the inability to install one in their own home.
Yes, that's correct.
And then the third one is electrify the city's vehicle fleet.
Yes.
How many vehicles in our fleet?
Yeah, there's about, I think, 60, 65 vehicles in the current fleet.
And so what are we assuming, would the whole fleet, 60, 65 vehicles have to be electric? Are we not counting a dump truck? What are we counting as our fleet? Because
We're counting cars, small trucks, light-duty vehicles. We're not counting
the heavy duty.
the large, heavy-duty construction.
Street
equipment.
sweepers, things. And what about police vehicles?
I believe this number does not include police vehicles.
All right, so what we have to do is convert to all of them convert to electric? Or
Not
does this 2030 number reflect 50% of the conversion? I'm trying to get a magnitude of what it's going to take to get to the number that it says we're going to get to.
Right now, we're assuming, I think it's around 20% would be, 40% of, thank you, 40% of non-police light-duty vehicles.
So 40% of 60, which would be 24 to 20, let's say 25 just
yes.
to be. Okay. Thank you for the help. I appreciate it.
Yes, just on this category too, if just briefly, most of the reductions seem to be coming again from the state with the mandate that there be no non-electric vehicles sold in the state from 2035 on. What specifically, like the percent, and that's a big reduction, I think, that we're part of that pie of reduction that's happening statewide.
Right.
Assuming that our residents are turning over their fleet consistent with the state mandate. So besides the EV charging stations and turning over our own fleet to electric, what are the other big things locally that this city, the city of Walnut Creek, will be responsible for doing?
Well, I would certainly say those are the biggest pieces, is the availability of the charging stations and then the city leading by example on the fleet. But other things that can be done include making sure that people are available, or making sure that people are aware of the electric vehicle options that they have, working with groups like MCE to publicize the availability of incentives and tax credits, making sure people know how cost-effective EVs are, providing preferential parking spaces. So there are a handful of other actions, but it is largely about encouraging consistency with the state and then just trying to push that EV adoption rate as high as possible, since it's not something the city can directly mandate.
Okay. Yeah, Councilmember Haskew.
Walnut Creek is a largely drive-through city, meaning other people from further away are trying to get to jobs on the other side of it. How are we measuring their impact, and what's our responsibility to reduce their contribution?
All of the numbers in the Sustainability Action Plan of vehicle miles traveled and emissions from that do not include those pass-through trips. So someone going from Concord to Orinda, just staying straight on the freeway, that's not counted at all in here. So that we recognize that the city has very little, if no ability, to affect those trips. So what we're really looking at here are cars that are registered in Walnut Creek, people who are traveling within Walnut Creek or coming or going between Walnut Creek and some other community.
Any other questions? No? Thank you.
Thank you. On the water, wastewater, and waste side, these four strategies collectively would contribute to about 7% of the reductions by 2030 and about 5% of the reductions by 2050. Most of those reductions come from waste, specifically that third bullet of achieving a diversion rate of 85% by 2030. That means that 85% of the waste generated in Walnut Creek would not go to a landfill. It would be recycled or composted or repurposed in some other manner. Currently, the number is about 77%. And this does include increase in composting under Senate Bill 1383. It does include efforts to reduce packaging through AB 54. All of those contribute to that 85% greenhouse gas reduction. This set of strategies also includes a lot around water and wastewater, being efficient with water and wastewater. That by itself does not lead to significant greenhouse gas savings, although there are some, but conserving water is absolutely critical for drought resilience. It's very important for resource conservation. So because this is a sustainability plan that's trying to get at the whole section of sustainability and all of these different topics, we have included efforts on water conservation here. And I can pause for any questions on water, wastewater, and waste.
We're going to start with Councilmember Darling on this one.
Thank you. This one, although it doesn't provide the kind of benefits that electric cars, I understand it better, so I'm happy to be here. First of all, on the waste side of things, I think you're looking at, I think the table said 75, the spreadsheet says 85%, and your report says 75, so we need to figure that one out.
Yes.
And then with the diversion of the organic material from the waste stream, are you envisioning just using the existing technology like composting, or are you starting, because this is the opportunity to actually do some carbon sequestration if you get into gasification and pyrolysis. Are you thinking, and I said that just because I knew she would laugh at that, but this is, if we're going to get to net zero, carbon sequestration is part of that, and the waste stream is one of the few areas that a city has control over. Have you looked at moving the waste side of things to a higher level than just putting it in the digester or composting it?
Well, I think the strategies in here would definitely support that, and we would encourage the city to take advantage of those emerging opportunities. These numbers right here are only talking about keeping it out of the landfill. They're not talking about advanced gasification or pyrolysis or those other techniques. So I think those would be additional reductions that could potentially be quantified further down the road when there's a little more certainty about how to do it. But right now, it's just focused on the landfill piece.
Okay. And the same thing with the wastewater, or with the water recycling portion of things, what are you assuming on how successful we are on moving Central Sand towards water recycling?
So right now, we are assuming that it's something that the city would certainly support, assuming all that it makes sense and is convenient technologically, economically, and so on. Right now, we are not necessarily assuming that that actually occurs, that there's not a pipeline built from Central Sand into Walnut Creek, because we know there are numerous challenges with that. And we don't want to take credit for something that's not considered feasible. However, we would certainly support that if and when it does become a viable option.
So it's more of a work with Central Sand and see if we can activate one of the options, and if we can't, then we'll just say we tried and we're doing gray water. So the benefit that you're getting out of Strategy 13 really is just the water, the gray water, or?
It is gray water, and then it is also, excuse me. Yes, it's also gray water for new and existing homes and businesses at some relatively low adoption rate as those technologies become more feasible.
If we do you have a sense of if we are successful in finally cracking the nut with Central Sand and getting a water recycling program either through the canal loop or a scalping plant out here somewhere, do you have any sense of what the benefits are for that?
We don't have a sense of the quantitative benefits. I think the benefit of recycled water is very much more on the resource conservation side and the drought tolerance rather than on the greenhouse gas side. But if there was a little more certainty around what that might look like or what might be feasible, I think down the road some numbers could be attached to it.
So it would be something that would really depend more on how the project's put together.
Right. How many people can take advantage of it, what types of technology are being used in the processing, and so on.
And the same question relative to the solid waste side, you also have the biosolids component when you're dealing with wastewater.
Yes.
And I know we've talked about this when you guys briefed us all, and I asked the question, and I'm assuming that right now we're not anticipating that Central Sand changes their biosolids applications.
Correct. We are including the emissions that are associated with biosolids in these numbers, but because the city can't really control what Central Sand does, we're not assuming any change to those practices.
So we can use
But-
oral suasion on them at some point, but
Yes, but we are assuming a slight reduction in biosolids produced as a result of the water and wastewater efficiencies.
okay. All right, thanks. I will not say pyrolysis again.
Just wanted to check in. About how many slides do you have left?
I believe I have, I think 2 or 3 more, and then we have a few to wrap up.
Okay. Please, I want to make sure we leave enough time for public questions and comments.
I think these next ones should be pretty streamlined. Then that brings us to the last category that achieves greenhouse gas reduction efforts, which is off-road equipments, and in particular, transitioning to pollution-free off-road equipment. The level of reduction here from this entire strategy is 2% of reductions by 2030, dropping to 1% in 2050. That does include electrification of all types of landscaping equipment, not only leaf blowers, but also lawn mowers and other portable landscape devices. This also includes electrification of construction equipment, although at a much lower rate. So we are assuming 85% of those small handheld or small motored landscaping equipments would be converted to electric by 2030, and that 10% of construction equipment would be converted by 2030. And I can pause here for any questions.
Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
Thank you. Can you remind me what the state regulations are in terms of the availability, and is this synchronized with as gas-powered hand equipment becomes less and less available, obviously the shift will occur in the market?
Mm-hmm. So the state's regulations are that what they call small off-road equipment, which includes leaf blowers as well as lawn mowers and other devices, model years beginning in 2024 must be electric. So older model years or used equipment that is gas-powered could still be sold, but anything new, model year 2024 or later, would have to be all electric.
So the take-up rate in the market will be more rapid because that's happening sooner and things do wear out in terms of handheld equipment.
Yes, even if the city were to do nothing, there would still be a gradual shift towards all-electric devices as the gas-powered models are replaced.
Thank you.
Councilmember Haskell.
So one of the things that I've heard sitting in this chair for a long time, or one of these chairs, has been that OSHA isn't going to be real thrilled with the transition because the electric machines are not A, as efficient, and B, they are heavier and more like, I'm looking at Heather because she's not frowning on me, I think, with the mask on. But there are real reasons why the industry hasn't flipped to electrical things too. That it's hard on the bodies, and batteries can be very heavy and do physical damage to the people using it, especially those who do it professionally. That was sort of like a question. What do we do when it's a conflict, I guess, is the ultimate question.
It's certainly true that there may be advantages in some respects to gas blowers, but then many other advantages to the electric-powered like leaf blowers or other equipment. We think that, or we anticipate that as that 2024 date comes closer, as the mandate starts to loom closer in people's minds, that we will see more of the market move towards addressing some of those deficiencies of the electric equipment, making it lighter, longer lasting, easier to use, and so on. But you are correct that there are challenges with the electric equipment, and that's something that should be considered as part of the priority and the evaluation of the strategy.
Councilmember Wolf.
One quick question. So of the total amount of expected decrease in usage of emissions by 2030, how much of that percentage do these portable landscape devices account for?
The landscape devices account for approximately between 1,800 and about 2,000 metric tons. So that's 0.5% of the reductions. That's all of the landscaping and devices.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then the final category to go over are the other community health and resilience strategies. These are what we call supportive strategies, which means that they do not directly contribute to measurable greenhouse gas reductions. However, they do contribute indirectly to greenhouse gas reductions in many ways. And there are a lot of cases where we know they are producing reductions, there just isn't a viable means of tracking or counting them. These strategies do include efforts to improve adaptation, address community resilience and resistance to disasters. This is pushing greater equity in the community, providing efforts to reduce air pollution, improve access to public health, and address emerging business and educational opportunities. So even though they do not contribute to this measurable achievement of greenhouse gas reductions or greenhouse gas emissions, they are certainly a key part of the Sustainability Action Plan. And with that, I will turn it to Carla to discuss her next steps. Thank you.
I would like to ask you a question about slide 16, if you don't mind, which was the graph. So if I read this graph, and I realize the lines are very thick, our emissions and basically everything was at a converging point. We met the goal. Except what I've heard now repeatedly today is we were below the goal. And so shouldn't this line actually be I'm not sure it reflects our starting point in 2017 of being below the goal.
Well, this does show your emission reduction in 2017. Your goal was about 520,000 metric tons in 2017, and as you can see,
It's at 400.
it is lower. It's about 470.
Okay, so the starting point on this graph is reflective of the fact that we beat the goal.
Yes, so the starting point on this graph is 2005. That's what we're measuring this all against. 2017, your goal was about 520, and it shows that you were about at 470. So you did exceed that 2020 goal.
Okay, so we are ahead of, so we would have a bigger objective if we had just met the goal.
Correct.
In 2017.
Because you went
Thank you.
beyond.
I just want to confirm that this actually said that because it went by pretty quickly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Haskew.
Yeah, if everything goes electric, are we sure that the grid can handle it?
That is certainly a much bigger thing than Walnut Creek by itself has control over. But what we are doing here is consistent with what the state has indicated they would like to go. Moving to all electric vehicles, electric appliances, electric leaf blowers and landscaping equipment and so on. So we anticipate that as things ramp up on the consumer side to drive more electricity use, there would be comparable increase at the state level and by PG&E and the other utilities to make sure that the grid can handle it. That's something that's really not in Walnut Creek's control. It's much more of a state effort, but nothing that we are doing is out of whack with the state's intended trajectory. So we think this is all consistent with their planning for the grid.
Okay, and what do we do in an emergency when the electrical grid just has an earthquake around it and it doesn't work? And are we completely so dependent on electricity that we are actually exacerbating the damage of I at least used a large word, exacerbating the problem of the crisis in itself?
Well, one of the strategies in here relates to increasing the amount of renewable energy that is generated locally, solar panels, even small wind devices if those are feasible. But to couple that also with battery storage systems, with microgrids, with ways of ensuring that buildings in the community can still not only generate power, but can use that power even if service from the grid is shut off. There is also emerging talk of electric vehicles being able to be used that way as batteries to power a house. We're already beginning to see that in the past few years with some of the new EVs on the market. So we think this all can help address that potential vulnerability of the grid going down from a public safety power shutoff or an earthquake or any other kind of hazard device. But you're right, it is something that should be considered as part of this all-electric switch. We just think that there is a feasible way of addressing that.
And I have one more question. Based on an article that I read not that long ago in the newspaper about solar panels that have finished their useful life, sapping into our water supply and making it impotable, have we looked and do we look at the overall ultimate consequences of all these choices, having focused on just these solutions?
I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. We know that there are ways of treating used solar panels, of reprocessing them, of recycling them. And we know that's something that's out of the city's control, how these things are built and the regulations related to their disposal. But we would hope that as these technologies mature, as they develop, and again, as the state puts more of a framework in place around that, that they will ensure adequate allowances for reprocessing and recycling so that they can be safely decommissioned. And with that, I will turn it back to Carla. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. So as mentioned at the top of our study session, we are not asking council for any direction today. However, we are welcoming feedback, questions, etc. on the draft strategies that you heard about, the information you heard about, the quantitative, qualitative analysis that was completed. And next slide, please. As the city manager mentioned, we will be coming back in the fall to dig in a little bit more on these, and really based on the feedback that we get today, what that could be, what we dig in on. So what we're asking today is really tell us what you think. What would you want to know more about? What would you want to explore more? What would you want to focus in on? Or what strategies would you want us to reassess assumptions on, things like that. So it's kind of an open book here. We are, as this is the first time you all are seeing the 22 strategies, as is the public, it really is a potential opportunity for you guys to give us feedback. The next phase is really focused on writing the plan and honing in on how we would implement the strategies that we finalize. We are expecting to, once we're finished with phase 2, which we have a few meetings to go until we are, we would enter phase 3 where we're writing the plan, doing environmental review, and it would be another opportunity for the public to weigh in on the plan and the strategies and implementation. And then of course you all would adopt the plan, and we're expecting to be back in spring 23 with a full plan for you all to opine on. But until then, we'll be working through these strategies to get them right. So with that, we'll conclude and answer any questions or hear any feedback you have.
I had just one, Carla, on the process. You're coming back to us in the fall for a follow-up on the strategies. Then the plan gets developed. And does that go to the Planning Commission before it comes to the City Council, or what do you envision there?
That's a good question. I believe it does, yes. Thank you. So we would take it through the formal process of going through Planning Commission and then back to you all for final adoption.
Okay. Thank you. If there aren't any other burning questions right now, I'm going to open the public comment period. This would be the time when any member of the public who wishes to provide comments on this study session item, the strategies related to the Sustainability Action Plan, please step forward. When you get a chance, hand a yellow speaker card to the clerk. If you're on Zoom, please indicate your intent to speak by raising your hand or pressing *9 if you're connected by audio only. We're going to take folks that are here in the chamber first. A reminder that there's a 2-minute limit. It does go by relatively fast, but we appreciate you being here and welcome your comments. Thank you.
Good? Okay. Hi, my name is Samir Advani. I've been advocating for a ban on gas blowers and a transition to electric since 2018, as many of you have met me and we've talked about it. If you look at the toxicity of gas leaf blowers versus gas cars, you find that blowers are around 20 times more toxic than gas cars for the same emissions. We estimate that in Walnut Creek, gas blowers emit around 3 tons of toxins, including volatile organics, nitrogen oxides, PM10, and most importantly, PM2.5. These toxins have a measurable public health impact and are a contributor to ground level air pollution across the community. If you consider those 3 tons of toxins and you say, what is the reduction in driving required of gas cars to achieve that same 3-ton reduction in toxins, you'd find that it's 6.65 million miles of driving, which is the equivalent of 530 cars. If you follow my math, 530 cars converting from gas to electric costs well over $25 million. To convert leaf blowers in Walnut Creek from gas to electric would cost the community under $500,000. So it's a massive outsized impact on air quality, not necessarily carbon emissions like Kevin alluded to. It is relatively small, but it has a big multiplier effect on air quality. And it's for that reason that dozens of cities have implemented bans. Most recently, in the last few months, San Rafael, Novato, and Fairfax, taking most of Marin County to electric. And dozens more are moving in that direction, including Lafayette. So I'm glad the city's taking this first step. I don't think it should take 3 years to transition. Other cities are doing it in 6 to 12 months. They're not much different than us, so we should be able to do it in that same time frame. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Robert Thomas. I'm a homeowner here in Walnut Creek. I live just over on Carmel Drive. I'm here to talk about leaf blowers. The fellow before me just talked about the chemical issue. I just want to talk about the environmental impact when you live in a community like I do that's surrounded by apartments and condos. I have a single-family home, but I'm surrounded by condos and apartments. All of those hire landscape companies. A day doesn't go by that there's not a leaf blower going on, because I'm surrounded behind me, across the street, to the left and to the right. Everybody hires landscaping companies. They're out there with their leaf blowers. It is non-stop. Up and down the street, there's all these leaf blowers going. The other element to it, besides the noise pollution, is the air quality, not in terms of the chemical issue, but most of the time, there's just these big clouds of dirt and such in the air. You drive around and it's incredible. Very few leaves. When did leaves become such a problem? When did we declare war on leaves? I mean, if the worst case scenario, we have a few extra leaves around the community, I can live with that. I think most people can live with that. So I would really like to see these gas leaf blowers gotten rid of. As the previous gentleman mentioned, it's done in a lot of communities. I don't know why Walnut Creek hasn't gotten there yet. And with regards to your question on weight, I have had both electric and gas. The electric is actually lighter. You don't have to carry all that gasoline in a gas motor. If you had a big battery that had to last all day, that'd be a problem. But you can do multiple batteries and you're fine. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Thomas. Is there anyone else here in the chamber that would like to provide public comment on this item? I'm not seeing any, so we'll go ahead and turn it back to Zoom. Madam Speaker, it looks like we have some folks that would like to make comments.
Yes, we do have a few speakers. Leela McCullough.
Hello, my name is Leela McCullough, and I found it encouraging to see that tree planting was included in the new plan, in the city and in open spaces. I think it would be helpful to know how many trees will be planted and what type of native species will be planted. I'd like to add to the plan a point about the protection and preservation of mature oaks, as oak trees capture more carbon than any other tree. So the older the tree, the more carbon that is stored. And last year, a study by the University of Birmingham found that when scientists bathed an old oak forest with high levels of carbon dioxide, they found that the trees increased their photosynthesis by 1/3. So 33% more carbon dioxide was absorbed by these trees, and they were able to make these adaptations. And considering that we're going to have more and more carbon dioxide in the air, and hopefully it'll go down, but these mature oaks can do a great amount. Other researchers have also calculated that when a very large oak is cut, 35 new smaller oaks have to be planted, and they have to grow for almost 30 years to offset the carbon stored in one very large tree. So whenever we can preserve the mature oaks, of course, it's highly preferable. But planting new trees and the appropriate native species is equally important. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. McCullough. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Radhika.
Hi, good afternoon, Council. I just want to also support the very well said comments on trees by the previous speaker. But my comment was basically, I'm a homeowner in a condo, and a lot of conversations about EV chargers and a lot of legislation that I see is for single family homes or so on, and new construction. So my question is, what is the plan for existing multifamily charging stations? As you know, Walnut Creek has a lot of condos, and some of them are almost like 30 years old. So that's my one question. And how would the council, or not council, how would the city support homeowner associations to transition into providing more chargers? And my third question is, what are the types of chargers? Because I'm not familiar with all the different kinds, but what I understand is, some are fast chargers and some are slow chargers and so on. So those are my three questions. I really hope, and I didn't quite see that detail in this plan, but I would love to see some detail on existing multifamily charging stations and rebates and so on. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Yoon Fan Lee.
Hello, thank you for an excellent presentation. And I have two comments. The first one is regard to public transportation. I wonder whether the encourage of bicycling is part of the picture. And if it is, I think there are several strategies that our city can adopt. So first, we can add bicycle parking in front of businesses, because finding parking is like what I usually have trouble with. And then in the long term, we can consider adding shade over bikeable streets and sideways, and also consider lighting some of our trails. For instance, the Iron Horse Trail is completely not lit. So it's completely dark, especially in winter, and it could be a hazard for pedestrians and bikers as well. The second comment is with regard to water use, and it has two parts. The first part is that we don't have a quantifying goal to reduce water use. Do we intend to have one? And then my friends who live in Palo Alto, they received notice from their city that they can only spray irrigate their lawn on Tuesday and Friday. So they struggle to keep their lawn alive, and they are considering to plant something else, more water-wise. Is our city considering something like this? And since I have half a minute left to answer the council's previous question on reusing solar panels, it was one of my concerns, but I read in Bloomberg Business Week that there's an existing European company that can profit from reusing solar panels. And I think since it is profitable now, it will be profitable in 20, 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. We appreciate your comments. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Carol Weed.
Hello, yes, I'm Carol Weed. I live in Rossmore. I wanted to comment further about trees and vegetation and its effect at mitigating climate change. I find very little in the report of any strategy to deal with that. There's mention of increasing trees in urbanized areas and developing a tree master plan confined to unincorporated county, and I didn't find much else. It feels as if trees or vegetation in general is being treated as sort of a garnish on an appetizer. Studies have shown, and scientists and even the California legislature are jumping on the fact that we could do so much more. And the woman who spoke about oaks emphasized the quantity of the impact to maintain the foliage that we have and the canopy and increase it. And it's not just planting more trees. If we take better care of the trees we have, there'll be less die-off. And the city has done next to nothing. Individuals have, and individual groups and organizations have. The city has done next to nothing to incentivize residents planting trees on their own property or banding together to plan on open space. So a lot more of that needs to be done. Lastly, I would like to see the amount of increased trees in urbanized area to be quantified. That's how you reach a goal. There needs to be a number established with that. The city of Santa Cruz, for instance, made an ordinance to increase by 10% per year their canopy. I'd like to see Walnut Creek do the same. Thank you.
Next speaker is 350 Contra Costa Action.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you. Welcome.
Great. Hi, thank you. Hi, my name is Lisa Jackson. I'm here as a resident of Walnut Creek, but also representing 350 Contra Costa Action. We're a climate-focused organization. We will be following up with some comments to a lot of the strategies that have been talked about today, and we do welcome the fact that you are moving forward now on the Sustainability Action Plan. One of the comments I just wanted to make really quickly today was around the section on the strategies around buildings, which is a huge part of the GHG reduction plan. For new buildings, a lot of cities are already moving forward with a new building electrification ordinance. And the county itself actually passed their new electrification ordinance for some of their buildings, residential, some retail and offices, this year. So there is a move to do that already. And we'd welcome you to look at the date that you're looking at. And the reason why is, I think you said 2026 for an ordinance for new buildings. And my question would be, well, why wait that long? It's something that can be done really quickly. And as a homeowner or somebody that's about to build in the city, you've got your RENA allocation to meet. Why put in buildings that have gas infrastructure in place when they have to be retrofitted in the future? It's just going to cost money to the homeowners to actually go and retrofit. So it would be better to actually put a new building ordinance in for electrification straight away. And so you don't have that lapse in time, basically. So I just wanted to point that out. And then to answer some of the questions that were raised about the electrification as well and the grid, both MCE and PG&E are very strong supporters of electrification. PG&E has actually said that they don't want to support gas infrastructure going forward. It's costly. It's going to cost a lot of money to actually upgrade their infrastructure, and they would like to move to electrification. So we will be following up with more comments, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Linda DeChambeau.
Oh, you're on mute. We can see you. Welcome.
Thank you. Honorable Mayor and Council members, I just want to thank you for the study session today on this very important topic and updating the 10-year-old climate action plan. I do encourage you to add resiliency as well as sustainability in the title and the content of the document, since we are already in a climate crisis. So kudos for the public vehicle charging ports and the hybrid vehicles. One thing that's not mentioned is Walnut Creek is, since 2018, also upgraded their city-owned buildings to deep green electric account 100% renewable. And I'd love to see in your strategy more on how to get the built environment, because other than transportation and electricity, that's probably the most important thing that Walnut Creek can do. And certainly giving a chance to publicize that the city of Walnut Creek has all gone deep green, and try to get those 2% members to get closer to the 10% we see over in El Cerrito and Lafayette, where they do more of that promotion. I have to also mention that Walnut Creek, along with Martinez, were the first two cities in Contra Costa back in 2007 to do their greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And I don't see much of that, and I'm really having trouble. I concur with some of the earlier comments that it's really important that anything that you do should be measurable. I did find online a 2021 inventory. I just don't see the link, not easily made in the staff report. And just want to also support that anything should actually be measurable. One of the things that a couple of our cities in Contra Costa County are doing now is similar to having a fiscal impact section on every staff report, is that they have a climate impact or greenhouse gas report in every staff report. So this would really keep it front and center and avoid another 10 years going down the path and wondering how do we measure them. And it's very common to just say no impact, just like fiscal impact. So I encourage you to take a look at that. I just want to support the earlier comments on trees and bicycling and gas leaf blowers. And I thank you again and look forward to seeing this in another public session.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Jan Warren.
Good afternoon. We've, as you know, been looking forward to this and appreciate the public speakers today. I can't pass up talking about this topic without, we're not just reducing GHGs, reductions in GHGs also reduces the toxic criteria pollutants, and it has a great impact on our health. And so we need to keep that. You say, well, why hurry? Why do it now? Why do it sooner? Because it's about our health and the planet's health. And we all need to pitch in, whether it's an individual action, our home, our neighborhood, our community, our county, and all the way to the state. Everybody needs to be pulling in the same direction. I wanted to comment on the MCE piece because some of the data on the additional page that wasn't shared today, 2019, 11.02% had opted out of MCE, and we need to go back and get those people back in. Additionally, we have this really low target of 5% going deep green by 2030. The 2.9% we have now, 2/3 of it's from the city facilities. So we need to do a much better job on education, using to inform the residents and to get greater buy-in from them, because it affects us all. And I've been every year, my husband and I are putting something into our home. We just got in a new heat pump water heater, and it does pay for itself, and we're not breathing methane. I would also mention we can do this faster, where I'm out of time, but there's a piece in there about the city lobbying the state to accelerate phasing out fossil fuel extraction and refining in the region, and I hope you support that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Warren. Any other speakers on Zoom?
There are no additional hands raised.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and close the public comment period and bring it back to the council. We've kind of gone through each of the strategy categories one by one and asked our questions, but if you have any final holistic comments on these strategies, I think now would be the good time to ask them.
I have some questions, actually.
Yes.
Based on the public comment.
Okay. Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
I have some questions based on the comments that we received. The question about trees and the impact on the environment, is that in the report, and was it studied, and what was it shown to be the effect on greenhouse gas emission reductions, which is the target of the Sustainability Action Plan, at least the primary target?
Yeah, so I'll defer to my colleagues on some of the more technical aspects. But one thing that we are limited in our ability to do as a city is to measure some of the sequestration or offsets that could otherwise be available. CARB is doing some rulemaking and guidance around this, so in the next several years that may be more possible for us.
Okay.
Is there anything we'd like to add on that?
Eli, do you mind coming up and talking about strategy 15 that mentions tree planting and the quantification around that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. At the moment, the strategy, the tree planting component of strategy 15 is generally supportive. It is not quantified. If that is the council's direction, I think we do have the means to do that within the city's area, and we can't quantify tree planting that's occurring outside of the city limits, but we certainly are able to add that in if that would be desired.
Have we quantified the impact such that it is not in the top 6 strategies? Let me see if I can reverse the way I asked the question, because I think the public was commenting that they're surprised that it is not in the top 6, which would make it a top 7. Can you explain why it isn't?
We have to prepare these in accordance with guidance from the state and from appropriate protocols. So when we follow that method of assessing the greenhouse gas emissions that are reduced from the city's existing trees and the existing open space areas in the city, it does not make up a significant component of those emission reductions following that approved method.
And this is a method approved by,
This is the method that is recommended by the state for local climate action planning.
okay, thank you.
Councilmember Darling.
Don't step away from those trees. So when you're looking at something like revegetation, wetlands management, or tree planting, that is slightly different than taking a car off the road. That's more of a way to sequester carbon rather than reduce emissions. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I'll defer to the technical experts, but it's my understanding we're good at being able to quantify what we're outputting. We're not really able as a local government at this point in time able to quantify the offsets
So
or
the
things that we would reduce.
The sequestration element of the plan is there's not good state guidance on how to measure it
As a local government.
as a local government. All right, thank you.
We've kind of, on the phasing questions, maybe you can speak a little more to the thought process that went into essentially the ban on gas leaf blowers and then also the electrical reach code for new buildings.
Yes, so starting with the leaf blower ban on use, what we're working with is a state ban on sale that would begin in 2024. That doesn't do anything to touch use of existing tools. So we had envisioned 3 years from adoption of this plan, but that date could be altered based on the timeline it's taken to get to this point or direction from council.
And then the other one was on the electrical reach code. Just to reframe, just to kind of confirm that even with the phasing that's proposed in the strategies, we meet and exceed the 2030 and the 2050 targets that are set by the state.
Yes, it would, even without a new a reach code being implemented for new construction, we would be able to achieve those climate goals set for us by the state in 2030.
Maybe just
That's largely because we're built out as a city.
That makes sense. And then the thought process that went into the 2026 date.
So 2026 lines up with the new back mud CEQA thresholds, is my understanding. Oh, sorry. The scoping plan coming from CARB. So 2026 would apply to residential retrofits and 2029 would apply to commercial and business-owned properties.
And make our local plan consistent with the state plan, essentially.
So we picked those timelines to be consistent with the state's current direction.
In terms of the questions that were raised by, I appreciate Mayor Pro Tem raising that. I know it went by quickly, but there was some discussion about bicycle improvements and alternative means of transportation. So I know that's in the plan and one of the strategies. Were there any other public comments that we wanted to get greater clarification on? Well, there was one about, it doesn't have to be today either. I want us to get to our deliberation. I know you're coming back in the fall, but I thought it was a good question about existing multifamily developments and what incentives could be provided to electrify those or provide for electric charging stations.
Yeah, so we actually do as a city have a reach code around multifamily and commercial EV charger installations. So that's triggered with certain types of retrofits or new development. But what we can do to incentivize that more, there is a whole array of different options. It could be financial incentives. It can also be advertising existing incentives from other organizations, or it could be regulatory, where it's more streamlined and over-the-counter permitting or faster permitting for installations that include more EV chargers.
Okay, good. Any other questions of staff? Are we ready for deliberation? Feedback on the strategies?
I have a semi-silly question, but it actually is not as silly as it sounds. In the last 5 years, our two-person family has acquired, I would say, way more electricity consuming day-to-day stuff than families 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Hope I'm using the right phrase. when we're looking at the consumption in the future, are we looking at all the potential additional things? Every floor needs a computer, every floor needs a TV, we all have new cell phones that we didn't need to charge until just recently. Are you looking at future development plans in all of this concept?
So I'll defer on some of the modeling, but we look at population growth and what's accounted for in other areas of the city's planning process. In terms of what technologies people will have in the future that become more standard, and certainly our households seem to become more energy intensive. I have a 12-year-old niece who just got a cell phone, so that's just the start of it, right?
Yep.
So that is something that has to be incorporated. And Eli can speak more to that.
Thank you.
You're absolutely right that as we talk about this transition to electric vehicles and electric landscaping equipment and electric appliances, there is certainly more electricity being used per person in the city. That is all factored into the modeling that we've done. So we are accounting for that. And we expect as the city moves forward with this and as MCE and PG&E continue their efforts, that electricity will move to become increasingly renewable, and then by 2045 it has to be carbon-free under state law.
Yeah, but you missed the point of my question, which is, we get bigger and bigger washing machines. We get lots more appliances. Everybody now has a standard kitchen supply of microwaves and crock pots, and although they're not called crock pots anymore, we keep adding electric uses in our standard household basic supply. Is that taken into consideration at all, or do you just assume that the same electrical consumption per house is relatively stagnant?
We look at current participation or current energy use, and then we factor in the things that we can model. So the EVs, the electric appliances, the electric lawn and garden equipment, and so on. We don't really have an accurate way of modeling small consumer electronics electricity use and how that might change in the future. So that's one area where we do have to recognize there's a potential gap in the modeling. But what we do try to do is include those changes that we do know are coming.
Okay, with that, if there are no further questions, so the recommended action here is for us to receive this report and provide input on the proposed strategies. Councilmember Darling, will you lead us off?
Thank you. And thank you guys for bringing this to us and walking us through. There's an awful lot of detail here, and it's a lot of complex issues. So a couple things, I am very supportive of a very robust sustainability plan because I think it's important for us as a city to continue to lead. Walnut Creek has been leading on these issues over the last couple decades, and we need to continue to do that. It is always easier to do something if everybody else is doing it. So when we're sorting out reach codes and when we go from facilitate to require, it will be important to look at what's happening around us, but I don't think we should hold back if there's something that has a big benefit and we can go from facilitate to required earlier in a way that makes sense. I think that would be a good thing to do. There are a couple things that I think we could add into the plan based on my experience with MCE. We've talked about moving people to deep green. One of the things that one of the cities did was they just had at the farmer's market that you could sign up, and it's about, I think it's about $10 extra a month. So you could sign up for 6 months of free deep green. And just like your Apple TV subscription, people will never go back. And so they actually have upped their percentage of deep green in that city by a one-time expenditure of relatively little money. The multifamily housing chargers are a challenge, and I think we probably ought to call that out specifically and find ways to facilitate those until they are a requirement, because that's going to be important at making the switch to electric vehicles equitable for everybody, not just our homeowners who can put it on their own house. There are some things here that call out for partnership with places like Central San and help them recognize that this is something that's important to us to move to recycled water. I know we have always had a good partnership with East Bay Mud and Contra Costa on implementing water conservation measures. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the goal of getting to 2045 and carbon neutral is a tough goal because we can't make airplanes electric yet and a number of other crazy things like that. So the idea of carbon sequestration is something that's important for us to move forward with. Lawrence Livermore National Labs came out with a report called Getting to Neutral that talks about the different ways that you can get to neutral through carbon sequestration in addition to the greenhouse gas. And they came up with 3 main strategies. One is using the power of nature to remove carbon dioxide, and that is tree planting, wetlands restoration, things like that. We can, as a city, can look at places to do that. They found that was one of the most cost-effective ways to do it. I think they said it's an average of $11 per ton of carbon dioxide removed through those more natural things. They also talk about converting waste biomass into fuel and storing the carbon dioxide either through sequestering it. And so there's some things that we can do there within our own open space in the city to encourage natural solutions and work with our partners to encourage them to look at ways to convert the waste biomass. And continue to lead on this and continue to use the power of running ahead and saying, come on, come with us, and we'll get there. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Darling. Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
Thank you to staff and the consultants. I know this has been a great amount of work, and I'm as in scope and all of the alternatives that you've been looking at and analyzing, and I appreciate the analysis that has been done because it's important to be able to try to identify those strategies that will yield the best and the greatest results the soonest, because if we can't be all things to all people, we can't do everything that's out there because that's cost prohibitive. So what do we do that is on a cost benefit analysis scale will get us the best results and get us closer to our goals? And so I appreciate the data. As we look at it in the fall again, I would appreciate really, while this level of detail in the tables is interesting, it's not very easily consumable. If you can get it down to the 6 strategies and the narratives and the detail in a summary report and let the attachment support the rest of it, it'll be easier for us to actually have a robust discussion on what we're doing with strategy 3 and what does it mean and when should the reach codes go into place, because we're fumbling with pages up here and it will be easier to discuss, I think. And I appreciate the comments of my colleague and look forward to seeing it again in the fall.
Thank you. Councilmember Wilk.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to staff and the consultants. There's a lot of work here, and as we know, this is the hot topic of the decade globally. What we can do locally still sets the example for our residents, our visitors, and the community. We've seen, as my colleagues have mentioned, that Walnut Creek has been a leader in this space, and it just by the very nature of where we are in the business community that we support in Walnut Creek, our neighbors in the county follow, and they say, well, if Walnut Creek did this, then we can too. So I like the fact that we can move forward in these areas where we can, as Mayor Pro Tem Silva mentioned, where we have the ability to have those immediate strategies that make the most impact. I don't even know if there's low-hanging fruit left anymore, but with a medium-hanging fruit and doing what we can to make that most impact immediate, we're going to see those results, and we're going to see our neighboring communities also be able to embrace that as well. I love the idea that MCE has for the farmers market. If you haven't already, Cindy, I hope that we encourage whatever we can to come out for that. Join us at our Farmers Market Council booth. That's a great way to get people to adopt immediately and with with really low effort. And those are the kind of things that we're going to have to do to make it as easy as possible for our community members to embrace. I've always been certainly supportive of what we're able to do locally here, and I look forward to seeing the fall report and being able to move forward at that point, and then talking about the climate emergency resolution and getting that resolved and solidified and moving forward in all the aspects that we can. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Haskew.
There was a lot of information in everything that you gave us, and thank you very much for your patience for my silly questions. And I have always been, since my youth, conscious of the fact that I have a responsibility personally for our environment. I've always driven little cars and didn't just jump in my car every time, organized carpools. I use and reuse. I actually mend my clothes and don't give them away. I really take personal responsibility for our community, and I mean the bigger world community. It is important that Walnut Creek leads. We're often in the place where people look to us to be the first to do it, and I take that responsibility also very seriously. So I have concerns that we don't want to be the A student and everybody is happy with being a B student around us. So I think we need to choose where we go carefully, but I think I hang on to the fact that it is our responsibility to lead our community. I also get back to the fact that everybody, not just Luella, but everybody has a responsibility to improve our world and think about whether we get in our car or walk a couple of blocks. It's the little stuff that adds up to the bigger stuff, and it makes the bigger stuff easier to make reasonable. So it will be a change to how we just do business. Zoom is the real good example when we're looking at how it's going to change commute patterns and things like that. Things are going to change, and there are going to be new scientific discoveries that make electric gas blowers far more efficient and far more powerful. So I have faith in our technology. I have faith in so much that's going on. But just to keep this moving is our statement very much that this needs to change. It's so obvious with all of the things that are happening with floods and fires and people dying because the temperatures are so outrageously hot that we as a world need to be more responsible, and Walnut Creek can be a significant part of that.
Thank you all for your comments. And thank you staff and the consultants for the very detailed report and for the progress that's been made on this issue. I'm proud that this council has made combating climate change and adopting a climate action plan and sustainability plan a priority. It's been a priority for 4 years now. I wish we could have accomplished it 2 years ago, but we got sidetracked a little by the pandemic. And but we, essentially we doubled down last year and said it remains our priority. We want to see this plan adopted. We've had some staffing challenges, but I think I'm in general comfortable with the strategies that staff has developed. I'd like to see us make progress on this by the end of the year if possible. That may not be achievable given the process that we have to go through with the CEQA and the Planning Commission, but as quickly as possible so that this plan is in place and really directing our efforts as we look towards 2030 and beyond. One area that I do want to be sensitive and careful about as we go about maybe being more specific in terms of the strategies or implementing the plan is thinking about our restaurants who rely heavily on gas appliances, and my understanding is there really isn't a viable alternative for those gas cooking equipment. So I want to make sure that we're careful in terms of how we implement that aspect It could also have aspects on life science and research and development, which we're trying to encourage in town because they also need. So I think we can generally have a statement that we want to be electric, but we might need to have some carve-outs for some very important industries in our city. I liked the comment about partnerships. When the comment was made about planting trees and vegetation, I know the Open Space Foundation and some of the folks that are on the Zoom call have walked me around the open space and showed me the various different tree plantings that they've done over the years, and that's something that I think we can't, we have 2,700 acres of open space. That's a huge benefit from a carbon sequestration standpoint. Mayor Pro Tem and I serve on the Recycle Smart Board, and I know it's not a huge reduction, but one thing that and this is just putting this out to the state, and no one from the state is watching, I'm sure, but we're doing all these efforts to try to divert waste and materials from the landfill, and that's great. I don't want to see that paper go to someplace overseas and get incinerated, because that's not achieving the we've kept it out of our landfill, but we're still contributing to the overall climate crisis. So I think that requires leadership, frankly, at the state level to create domestic markets for recycled products. I think that's happening on the plastic side, maybe more than the paper side, but I'd like to see, we need to be partners in this, and there needs to be a greater effort to make those products recyclable, truly recyclable. And I believe that those are essentially all my comments. So thank you again, and do we have a date yet for the October meeting? It'd be nice to publicize that if we do.
Not yet. We're fine-tuning the schedule. We're targeting one of the 2 meetings in October.
Okay, and we'll publicize that on the website and through the notification process. Thank you, everyone, for coming or appearing by Zoom and giving us your comments. We appreciate the feedback not only this afternoon, but that's gone into the years of getting us to this point. Stay tuned. More progress is coming. And we're going to adjourn the special meeting, and we'll resume our regular meeting at 6 p.m.